Decision Money, a conversational podcast about personal financial topics aimed at improving conversations about money in your marriage so you can reach your dreams together. This is a weekly discussion brought to you by a seemingly financially incompatible couple bonded by the legal contract of marriage. My name is David, your favorite saver, and I'm joined by the spender who I decided to spend my life with, Heather.
Best decision you ever made.
And I've made a lot of decisions, so you're not wrong. That's a pretty good one.
It was.
Well, we have a wonderful show planned for today. Today we're going to be talking about making big money decisions.
Yeah, big money, big money.
Is any money decision small? I mean, it feels like they're all pretty important.
I feel like you think even just like buying a $1 ice cream at McDonald's is a big decision.
Well, you compound that dollar over the course of the next 30 years. And it's a pretty big decision. That's an expensive ice cream cone. So that's one of the reasons why we should probably talk about it. Because every money decision's big. But I think this also applies to, I think a lot of what we're talking about, going to talk about today applies to money decision or just big decisions in general.
Yeah, I think like you said, like you've made a lot of decisions in life. Like all of us have. Every day you make, I don't even know how many decisions. There's probably statistics out there like that. We should probably do some research. But the point is...
we should come prepared to these things.
We're all making decisions, small and big. And that's what happens in life. Opportunities come, challenges arise, life changes, and you got to make some decisions.
It does. And oftentimes you can be forced to make decisions even if you're not looking to do so. So opportunities or just situations come up that force you to make a big decision when you're not prepared for it. And so it's important to at least think ahead around how am I going to react when those things happen.
Yeah, good and bad, right? Like you can have a natural disaster or your car breaks down and you weren't planning it, you got to make a decision, or you get offered a great opportunity. So yeah, good and bad surprises come up and you may not know that it was coming.
Right. And I know we were using this term big decisions, but I think big is relative. And so when we're talking about this, we're not putting necessarily a dollar value on what constitutes a big decision, because a big decision for someone might be $5, and a big decision for someone else, the impact might be $5,000. I don't. Who knows?
That's
or
right.
500,000.
Even between us. I think that our materiality thresholds look a little different as to what is a big decision or not.
That's a good point. Your materiality is way too high.
No.
And mine is just right. So, yeah.
But, and honestly, the other reason we're talking about this is that usually most decisions in life have a financial impact to it. And you're probably like, no, that's not true. But if you really stop and think about it, most everything you do in life has a financial impact. You know, where your kids are going to go to school, what kind of car you're going to drive, what job you take, where you live. Like all of those things cost money or like are a give and take, right? Things that you're giving up or that you're spending money on, or you're not spending money. I mean, that usually has some sort of tie.
Yeah, there's
money.
At a minimum, there's an opportunity cost.
Right.
And so if you're taking an action that's 100% free, you're doing that instead of taking an action that maybe could be improving your financial situation or making it worse, right? So staying level there's an impact there.
Right. So we thought today we would just walk through a fairly recent major decision that we would call, I think we'd qualify this as a big decision that we made
yes.
made in our life. I'm not sure how many of you realize, but we actually are currently living in Singapore. We moved to Singapore in February of 2020. So
I think it's come up a couple times on the old podcast.
I think it probably has. So we thought we'd just kind of walk through that experience and the decisions. I mean, there wasn't just one decision. There was a lot of decisions and kind of what we had to think about, what do you look at, and try to give you guys some tips on, how to tackle decisions, big or small, that you're facing in your life. So this decision came up. It was a surprise, but not completely. So living overseas or having an expat assignment was something that I probably most of my life had wanted. And I know we talked about it when we were married, having an opportunity and living overseas and being able to do that. And so it's something we'd been talking about. It was somewhat of a dream of mine. So something that we had talked about and were thinking about, and we had moved when we were married anyway, a different time, domestically within the U.S. But so I had started a job, and I thought there might be international opportunities, but then kind of thought it had passed, and then all of a sudden one day I got offered the opportunity and to move to Singapore, and texted David, and I was like, oh my goodness, this happened. And I completely thought that when I got home we would be like, well, that would be fun, but it's not going to work. And I walked into the house and David was like, that's awesome, I want to make this work, let's see if we can figure it out. And then a lot of the next steps happened to figure it out, and ultimately we ended up in Singapore.
It's just that easy. That's it. You just have a quick conversation, and then you decide to do something, and you do it. Well, that's been a great episode, Heather. Thank you so much for walking us through that decision-making process. Yeah, Heather makes it sound super simple, and it was very much not simple at all, and it was very stressful, and honestly, it's still stressful. But that's this whole decision-making process, I think, was a bit easier for us because we had been talking about, as you said, this international travel, international assignment in the past. And so we knew this was a goal. This was something that was in line with our goals. And so when we were talking about this opportunity, we were able to have that discussion in relation to how it related to our overall goals as a couple.
Yeah, and like when we didn't really know, like I knew I wanted to do overseas, but I didn't know where, right? I mean, the world's very big and there's lots of places, and so getting the opportunity to move to Singapore was a pretty nice part of it, since it's pretty easy on Westerners and the language and just overall environment, so that made it pretty easy as well.
It made it quite a bit easier, yes. I didn't have to learn another language, which is a huge plus. And as we were looking at this decision, we knew that it was in line with the goals that we had around living internationally and such. We also knew that there was going to be a financial impact. And so one of the first things we had to do was evaluate what that impact was across all areas of our life. So there was an impact to work situations. Obviously, this was a work move, so it impacted Heather's career, both in terms of what we saw as potentially opportunity for advancement after this role. It impacted my work situation in terms of I had just started a new role and had just received a bump in pay, or was about to receive a bump in pay as well for taking on that new role, and would have to step away from it. And so there's financial impact there.
Yeah, and on the work situation, I think that's a really good point, because this was a great opportunity just work-wise, fitting in with what I wanted to do and potential afterwards. I was just actually recently talking to a friend about a potential international assignment, and honestly, the assignment wasn't that great. Didn't really fit in much. His lateral move wasn't really fitting in, but it was kind of, is this international? And not that that's still not the right decision, but because this is just one component of looking at your work. But for us, it was for our situation, it was really positive for my work situation and actually kind of negative for your work situation, right? But that's just, again,
Right.
one component of one thing that we looked at.
Right, yes. And so that was one component. That was probably the first component we looked at. The other major piece, of course, is once you figure out, is this going to work, or could this work from a work perspective, then it becomes a little bit more real, and you got to say, okay, well, now what's the impact to my family on this? And Heather and I don't have kids, so we didn't have to worry about that component of it, but we did have to worry about our extended family, parents, and the amount we'd see nieces and nephews, the amount we'd see siblings. And we were in a situation where we knew my dad was having having issues. He had been hospitalized, previously, and we were like, "Oh, is this the right time to go?" Because he wasn't doing great. We knew Heather's parents are getting older as well, and so we want to make the most of the time with them. And there are things to consider.
Yeah, for sure. It was a big component and definitely a decision factor. I mean, one of the things we did do was negotiate in multiple trips home a year. Now, we haven't been able to do that in the age of COVID, but who would have predicted a global pandemic? But it was definitely a key factor as we were considering the decision. The next thing that was a key decision is kind of like where you're at in life. So, we didn't think this international thing would happen. We were kind of, more than midway through our careers. We thought the opportunities had kind of passed. So we had recently bought a house, 2 years prior to getting the opportunity, and it was kind of our dream home. It had been a life goal to be on a lake, and we'd been saving financially. It was our big financial goal that we had been working towards, and we finally found the right place and the dream home, and we bought it, and it was awesome. And then it was like, now we're thinking about leaving this place. So that was a big component, a big part of the decision as well. And I mentioned we had moved previously and we had rented our home, and so we had experience with rentals, and not always great experiences with rentals.
I was not very happy with how the rental turned out. It was disappointing. The renters just don't take as good a care of your place, and if you really like your house, if you have an emotional attachment to it, renting it out is probably not the right thing to do. And we have an emotional attachment to our current home, so yeah. Anyway, the final thing, and call me a little more materialistic about this, but we weren't able to. And I don't know that this really factored into the decision, but we couldn't bring our stuff with us, right? So this was something where you feel your stuff kind of is, or at least for me, having my stuff around is part of what makes home feel homey to me. And I knew that when we came to Singapore, we'd have to leave all that behind. I'd have to leave family behind. I'd have to leave the house behind. I'd have to leave my stuff behind. I'd have to leave my work behind. I'd have to leave everything behind. And that is just psychologically something that I had to get over. And it's tough. It's tough. You have friends, you have family, you have community built up, and walking away from that is hard.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, it's definitely a factor. I mean, one good thing about the timing now versus like having done this 10, 15 years ago, right? There's so much better technology tools to keep you talking to people and connected, but it's different. It's hard, and it is a sacrifice. It was definitely a deciding factor. So besides all of those topics or areas, like David mentioned, there was obviously really a financial piece that we needed to think through and decide, is this the best financial decision? And not that every decision you make is always going to be positive and financial. You may make a decision for one spouse to not work, so you're going to bring home less income. And that's the right decision for your family if that's a decision you make. So it doesn't mean that every financial decision is going to bring you more money. It's just a component that you need to be acknowledging and realizing, like, how is this impacting us? Is it bringing more money in or costing us more? But what's the impact? So for us, we really had to dig in and understand, first of all, the impact to our income. Like, what were the changes for income? David was going to start earning a salary in Singapore dollars, and you're trying to figure out the whole currency exchange. And his salary was going down, mine was going up. There was the whole expat package. So, and then the other side of income is obviously the expenses. So really understanding how much does it cost to live in Singapore. And first thing you Google about Singapore, it's like one of the most expensive cities, if not the most expensive city in the world to live in. So it's like, what does that mean? Can we even afford this?
Yeah, and you talked about me bringing in Singapore income, and I think that's something that I should call out, is that we didn't know that. So when we made the decision to move to Singapore, we didn't know that I was even going to have a job. And I've been with my company for a long time, going on 19 years now. But still, ultimately, they couldn't give me a decision as far as we can make this work or not before we had to tell Heather's employer that we were coming out here. And so I had to very much just step out on faith saying, I guess we're going, and I sure hope it works out with my current employer, because otherwise I'm going to be unemployed. And so it definitely would have been a financial step back in terms of income had it not worked out with my employer. But we were banking on this being a great experience to see Asia and see the world, and it was going to be a good life experience that would make up for the lost income. Thankfully, my employer did find a position for me here, and it has worked out, but that was very much up in the air and not a sure thing when we had to make the decision, which was scary.
Yeah, I mean, we did know that you would be allowed to, under your permit, to work, so you could have found a local job, but, we didn't know what that would look like. Yeah.
Hopefully I'd be able to find a position.
But
we don't know.
We also didn't know that you were going to become this massive YouTube star and bring home all the YouTube monies. So.
I don't know that we've really talked about the YouTube star action on the podcast, but yeah. So for those wondering, we also have a podcast, we also have a YouTube channel called Singapore Expat on YouTube. So youtube.com/channels/Singapore Expat. Anyway, we have a short URL. Search Singapore Expat. You'll probably see my picture. And so that's what she's talking about. We do a little adventure typically once a week, and you can see what we're up to. But yeah, that's kind of what's going on. So I think my point is that that was definitely part of the financial picture here is, will I have a job or not? And that was something we didn't have an answer to. We didn't have all the information. We weren't going to get all the information. And it was incredibly uncomfortable stepping out with that. And it worked out, but oh gosh, it's scary. The other thing that we had no idea about was COVID, right? So yes, things can happen, and we had this picture in our head around this is why we're making this big decision. And yes, big portion of it was advancing Heather's career. But like I said, the other big portion, and why we were putting my career at risk, was we thought this was going to be a great experience to see Asia. And we've been here for a year and 15 months, and that hasn't happened at all because of COVID. So that's been a huge disappointment, but it's also like it would have been even more so had the career thing not worked out.
That's a really good point. That's a really good point. So I mean, like any decision, you really do need to evaluate all the pros and cons. There are going to be sacrifices that you're going to make. Probably. I mean, most decisions you're usually giving up something to take on something, right? But hopefully those sacrifices are worth it. And again, it's not like we've talked about. A lot of things we've talked about haven't necessarily been financial. There's a lot of things that go into making a decision.
Well, like the travel, right? So we part of the
Right.
the decision was the travel, and not everything turns out the way you want it to. Or it can, yeah. So there are sacrifices that are made there, and as you're evaluating these decisions, be aware of your own tendencies or prejudices or biases. So I know for me that it's very easy for me to get caught up in either what I'm losing or fear of change, or get caught up on a couple negatives and amplify them perhaps more than I should, and weigh them higher on my list of pros and cons for going with a certain way with a decision or not. I don't know if you're like that, Heather.
No, I'm probably the opposite, where it's just like I'm all in without really maybe thinking it through as thoroughly. But it is good to know, but it's also good on the opposite side for me to know that, right? And be like, okay, wait, have you really thought through it all? Do you realize all of the things that you're giving up to do this new flashy, shiny thing that you want.
Right.
And as you've heard, there's like probably a million reasons why we shouldn't have made this decision. You're probably wondering, did they make the right decision? Now, granted, we're over a year out, so it's easier looking back.
Yeah, we
now,
might have made had we known what we know now, we might have made a different decision. Sure, but there's always going to be a million reasons not to do something,
right?
And so you can't necessarily let that keep you from doing something. But make sure if you are doing something, you're doing it for the right reasons. You're not doing it just to do it. You're doing it. You're chasing after something. You're not running away from something. You're not doing it just to take an action. I wanted to mention one story. I had a friend that I was talking to shortly after I made the move out here. I think it was pre-COVID even, like the 1 month pre-COVID that we had here. And
it was 5 weeks. Like I guess there's 5 week months, but
and he was talking about how cool it was that we moved to Singapore, and oh my gosh, that's so awesome. I wish I was able to do something like that. I wish something like that I could make something like that happen. And I was like, well, and he's doing similar career path to me and similar everything to me. And essentially I told him, well, yeah, you could do this too. It's real easy. All you have to do is give up your job, give up your family, give up your friends, give up your house, give up your hobbies that you're doing there in the US. Just give all of that up and start fresh in a new place. That's all you have to do. How hard is that? It's not so I guess the point is it's not that certain things are out of reach. It's just that some people don't necessarily want them bad enough to chase after them and to make it happen.
Right. And at the end of the day, we made this decision together. So for those of you that are married and listening to this podcast, you really need to get alignment as a couple and agree. And it may take a while, or eventually someone's going to have to kind of, maybe sacrifice or agree. But the two of you need to come to an agreement to make the decision together.
And so, what essentially have we learned, Heather, from this whole experience? This big, this big decision.
This might have to be a two-parter episode.
Oh my goodness, we are.
Can we have? Just kidding. So I think one thing, and I'm not pointing at you, but don't automatically say no to an opportunity.
She's pointing at me.
No, I'm not even looking at you right now. Don't automatically say no to an opportunity, even if it's super scary. Make sure you fully evaluate it. You do need to fully evaluate it and become comfortable with it. But just because something's scary doesn't necessarily, just don't go, like David said, if your natural tendency is to shy away from scary things, don't just go right to that.
And completely agree. I would also like to add that I'm a kind of an analytical guy. I want to have a lot of information, and so my advice here also is or a lesson you could take away from our experience is do your homework before you make a big decision. Now, you're not going to get all the answers. It's impossible. We didn't have all the answers. We didn't have all the details before we made our decision, but we went as far as we thought was reasonable in the amount of time we had in order to say, what does the financial picture look like? How do we make things work with our family? How do we make things work with the house if we don't want to sell the house and we don't want to rent out the house? How do we make that work, and what's the impact of that? So we did some evaluation, we did some research on that before we made a decision.
Yeah, and I'm not usually the research person, but in this case, it was really important. And in case you guys haven't heard of Google, it's this thing called the internet where you can go out and pretty much find information on anything you need to know. So, again, we were able to figure out how expensive Singapore. You could look at apartments. You could realize what things costed. And then also, learning about expat packages. I'm so thankful. I did a bunch of research on that. I reached out to my friends. I got connected to random people that had expat assignments actually in Singapore who were willing to share.
And how did you get those connections?
I mean, through my friends, like I would, shared with people that, hey, I'm moving to Singapore. I'm looking at this, and they'd be like, oh, everybody seems to know somebody. Oh, I have somebody who went there, or I have a colleague or a friend, and they're more than willing. And even like there's Facebook group that we join, and it's just amazing the people that are out there and they're wanting to share and willing to share information. And since then, I've actually done that. Like people have reached out to me, and I've shared. So it is really important to do your homework and get equipped with the information to make sure you can make a proper decision.
So even if you're not moving to Singapore, even if your decision isn't about moving around the world, you can still reach out to your friends and get their advice, or see if they know somebody that's had to make a similar decision or gone through a similar process. That's a really good tip.
Yeah, and for me, like I'm an extrovert. I like to talk through things, and so if you can, if it's not too personal or private of an issue, I do recommend that you talk. I mean, obviously you need to talk to your spouse, but if you've got your family and friends or close people that you could talk through, like I found it really helpful to just kind of talk through and hear people's perspectives, or they'd ask a question that, oh, I hadn't thought about that. And so for me, that really helps me process. If it's something you can talk openly.
Yeah. And I mentioned this earlier in the podcast, but one of the things that really helped us at least put us on the path of saying, yes, this is something we want to investigate further, is that this was already something that was within our goals. And so one of the lessons here that I think I can take away is the importance of revisiting your goals when you're making a big decision, to say, is this big decision in line with the goals that we've already set as a couple, or is it outside of those goals? And if it's outside of those goals, then I'm not saying you shouldn't do it, but you need to stop and ask yourself real hard, is this really the direction I want to take with my life or with our life together? If it's going to put us in a direction that takes us further away from our goals rather than closer to the goals we had set out before.
Yeah, and not just your financial goals. Like it could be, like you said, wanting to travel or have an experience versus just the financial. And then, make sure you get a full picture of your financial situation. I had several spreadsheets because I love Excel going during this, where I was, modeling the different scenarios. I built a cool model where I could go in and input, make a few changes, and it would just automatically calculate it. But
the accountant pulled out Excel and was doing some fancy modeling and formulas and such?
Yeah, it was pretty cool.
Oh, that's surprising.
I have this certain color that I always pick for the cells that you're supposed to change.
Oh, is it like fuchsia?
It should be. It's kind of a boring color. I'm embarrassed now to say it. But anyway, I love me my Excel models. But you definitely want to look at understand the whole financial situation and what the picture is going to look like.
I think you need to go back to the fuchsia with your...
I have a t-shirt that says that.
with your Excel models.
All right. Well, I hope this was helpful, but we want you to continue this discussion with your spouse. So, if you have a big decision, big or small, it can be small, it can be big, it's all relative, that you're currently exploring, talk through it with your spouse. Hopefully you can use some of the tips and learnings that we shared today to help focus the conversation. If you currently don't have a big decision, think about a past decision you made as a couple. Debrief the decision. Isn't that fun to always kind of have a debrief? We never take the time. How would you have handled that decision today? Is there something that you would have done different so you can learn for the next time you've got a big decision? So, David, I guess I want to ask you that same question. So looking back on past decisions, it doesn't need to necessarily be the move to Singapore. Any decision, big or small. What would you have done differently, or have they all been perfect? Have you done everything perfectly?
Well, I am pretty perfect, but...
That's why you're doing a podcast.
That's why I'm on this side of the microphone.
You're certified to do a podcast because you're perfect.
No, hardly. Hardly. Quite the opposite. No, I'm oftentimes a guy that lets... at least I worry maybe that I'm the guy that lets fear get the better of him. I don't really like change very much, and so if there's a decision that involves a lot of change, I shy away from it a bit.
That's good as your wife, so you're not going to trade me in for a different model.
Right. I will not trade you in.
Positive things on that.
I am loyal. I'm very loyal. But yes, I might give more weight to the pain of the transition than I should. But knowing that about me, I think, has also more in recent years helped me to not lean that direction. Just because I know, so I talked earlier about knowing your tendencies and knowing your biases, and I think that's mine. And understanding that I have a bias to be more, to weight more negatives that involve change allows me to take a step back and say, maybe I shouldn't be thinking about it in this way. And so it gives me reason to pause and reevaluate.
No, that's really
Yeah.
good. It's good to be self-aware.
And so I think that helped in the decision coming here, and then also, of course, the goals.
Well, and I think
being a part of our goals.
being married to me and pushing you a little bit.
You push me
and
on
you
everything.
balance me. We're a good balance. We're a little balance beam here.
Yeah. So how would you respond to this question?
So for me, this is probably going to sound similar if you've listened to any of our episodes. But for me, I think the issue I run into is when I make decisions based on emotions. So there's been a few of those. So I remember like when I was having a really stressful time at work. It was my first job. I'd been there like 8 years, and all of a sudden my Christmas vacation was canceled and I had to work over the holiday, and I was just really, really grumpy, and I ended up meeting with a recruiter, I remember, on Christmas Eve because I was so fed up. And I think it was the right decision to leave. I don't know. I mean, the decision has made the path I'm in now. But, the place that I chose going, I mean, it was a great company too, but I was only there a year and a half. It wasn't like long-term thing. So I don't know. Like, I don't know how it impacted the decision, but I think for me, one of the things I always need to do is like, because I can react like, oh, this is super cool, let's do it. Or, oh, I'm super mad, I want to like cancel that, subscribe to the cancel culture. Like, just pausing, and that's what I'm trying to do this year, is when I'm emotional, take a pause, because usually what I find out is if I wait 24 hours, the next day when I come back to it, it's not as heated, it's not as emotional, and I can think through it a little bit better. So,
and correct me if I'm wrong here, but when thinking back on that, it felt to me more like you were running away from a situation
Right.
rather than you were running to something that you were inspired by or that you were
Right.
excited about.
Exactly. So it's a good thing I need to be aware of, is not just going by my first emotion. However, I am a gut girl, and my gut usually does treat me well. So it is a good little sidekick for me. I'm in the gut triad on the Enneagram.
And I have no idea what that feels like. I don't have gut feelings. I don't have them. And if I were to have one, I wouldn't trust it. So
You enjoy being in your head. It's good.
I am all in my head, maybe too much so sometimes. But I think that about wraps up our conversation for today. We would love to hear how your conversations around money have gone, or to take your questions on a future episode. You can email us at marriageandmoneypodcast@gmail.com or message us on Instagram at marriage.and.money. Thanks again for joining us this week, and remember that whether you are a spender or a saver, your best financial life lies somewhere in the middle.